Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by our first sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement. We believe in freedom of movement, and freedom of movement is exactly what this establishment, this global establishment, means to take from you. I am Royce White. I am your host, and I am here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, for the 26th episode. The day is Monday, April 3rd, year of our Lord 2023. And I don't want to do any housekeeping today. I just want to get right into it. We're going to need the full block of time to get through what I want to discuss today. And today I want to discuss let's redefine globalism. Let's redefine globalism for you, because I don't want to come to you and say words like globalism or talk about China and the CCP or the petrodollar or the post-democratic liberal world order, the post-World War II democratic liberal order. See, even I get mixed up sometimes. It's such a mouthful. Or the Trilateral Commission or NATO or any of these geopolitical topics, and have you think, oh, this is just a young man who's initiated or well read in geopolitical matters who's trying to wow us or you know trick us, so to speak, with this jargon. I'm going to do my best today to take you from the global down to the local, from the past to the present, and help you understand how these things have come to be orchestrated the way they are and carried out the way that we're seeing. And we're seeing it happen right now. When you talk about a war between Russia and the Ukraine, which is really Russia and Great Britain, or you talk about the CCP and us being in a trade war with the CCP, and the CCP, the the Chinese Communist Party, which is in power there in China, doing a deal with Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia to create what they are now calling a security bloc, a new Eurasian security bloc against America, the West, and the American dollar. To be quite honest, I want to help unpack these things for you, and then we'll get into some more personal, individual stuff towards the end if we have time. So get your notebook out, because today is going to be a history lesson of sorts. First term you got to get down: Thucydides Trap. Okay, Thucydides Trap. You're going to start to hear this term being used more and more as the tension between us and China ramps up in the weeks and months to come, given the economic news that is now hitting the headlines in regards to the dollar standing on the world stage, and now this petro yuan, or this Eurasian security bloc between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Thucydides Trap. What is the Thucydides Trap? The Thucydides Trap was a political analysis done by the historian Thucydides about the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a war mainly between Athens and Sparta, two ancient Greek city-states. And these two ancient Greek city-states, after the Persian War, I believe, after they fought the Persians, this would have been your 300 Greece versus Xerxes and the Persian Empire. After that, I believe, I may be mistaken there, but I believe it was the Persian War. After the Persian War came the Peloponnesian War, but after the Persian War, Athens saw an increase of their economy. Okay, their economy began. Sparta was considered the traditional namesake city-state of the Greek city-states. Number one, because they had an incredible army, incredible military prowess. They were an incredible land power. Athens was more of an academic center, more of a thought center of Greek philosophy, and Athens became a better naval power. And through their naval power, their economy began to expand, and their territory began to expand after the Persian War. And so Greece and Athens, in Thucydides' analysis, were on a collision course. Why? Because Greece had a fear of the growth in Athens, and that the growth in Athens would eventually become a threat to them, thus putting them on what would be a military collision course. Now, the Thucydides trap, the Thucydides theory of the case is that the Corinth dispute. Corinth was a city or a place, a town, a territory that sat on Sparta's territorial map, if you go back and look during the time period. At the time, Corinth sat on their territory, but it was close to Athens. And so there was a dispute about Corinth, and Corinth was this sort of this sort of tributary place, this tributary territory, this tributary city or town. And Thucydides makes the case that although the dispute historically began on paper, you could say, with a dispute about Corinth, the collision course was set long before that, because there are the undertones, and this is Thucydides' case in the more general geopolitical sense. There's always undertones between two great powers, one rising and one declining. There are always undertones of geopolitical mistrust or distrust that put them on a collision course, and then individual situations along the way spark the flame that becomes the conflict. I hope that wasn't too much. Corinth became the territory that would spark the flame. Now, Thucydides also says or asserts that Corinth and other individual smaller players that were either aligned or intertwined with with Sparta and Athens, understand the undertone of tension between the great powers, and they use that tension in order to facilitate their own gain and reposition themselves by reading the winds and aligning themselves with the power they think is either rising, or so on and so forth. They do it for their own gain, their own ambitions. And this was Corinth, and this was I think it was Corsia, and Corsia was another power that was Athenian territory, but it was across from the main Athens city. It was across another piece of land. It was sort of over on the if you're looking at a map, it was on the left side, closer to Sparta actually than it was to Athens. So that became a disputed territory. Now, why am I telling you this? Now, if you go on your YouTube or you Google Thucydides Trap, you'll see that it's become the commonplace geopolitical theory that dominates the tension between the United States and China. You can find politicians, you can find political pundits, you can find military generals, all kinds of General Mattis, General Mathis, a bunch of people, General Flynn, and all these people talk about Thucydides Trap. Why? Because in our case with China, we are considered the declining power, if you let the Western elites tell it, and China is the rising power. Now, I wanna help you understand the players here. Henry Kissinger and Graham Allison. Now, Henry Kissinger was the kingmaker, or the whisperer, the king whisperer to Richard Nixon. But even before that, Henry Kissinger was a major player in the construction of and the execution of the post-World War II democratic liberal order. Him and Mika Brzezinski from Morning Mika, we call it Morning Mika here because Joe is a cuck. Morning Mika and her dad, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was Henry Kissinger were tight, but also Klaus Schwab, right? He had ties in with that crew as well. And so you see now the World Economic Forum, which is this sort of it's not rebooted, it's been rebranded, it's been around for a long time, but it's become one of the forefront leaders in international geopolitical collaboration, especially in an economic sense. But this is all a remnant of this post-World War II democratic liberal order that Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski and these guys came up with. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, Bretton Woods Conference, NATO, Trilateral Commission, the list goes on and on and on and on. This is globalism, ladies and gentlemen. They can try and tell you it's anti-Semitism. They can tell you it's conspiracy theory. All of these things and all of these terms I'm using, you can go look up. Post-World War II democratic liberal order, also referred to as the liberal world order or the rules-based order. Okay, you got Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, you got Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. You got the Bretton Woods Conference. You got the World Bank, the IMF, and the United Nations. If you want to get really deep in the weeds, Trilateral Commission and NATO. Just some to throw out there. Now, you're going to hear Thucydides Trap start to hit the news if you're paying close enough attention. And you'll hear people talk about us not falling into Thucydides Trap. Because what Thucydides said is these powers were destined to collide. And throughout history, since that analysis, in modern times, there have been 16 conflicts where a Thucydides Trap was the analysis, right? The Thucydides Trap has become one of the prominent geopolitical analysis of conflicts between superpowers. Now, of those 16 occurrences of a Thucydides Trap, 4 times the two nations averted conflict. 12 times they didn't, and catastrophe ensued, which meant there was a kinetic war and many lives were lost. But there were 4 times where war was averted, or all-out catastrophe was averted. What our elites, our Western elites, our academic elites, our thought leaders would like to push is that China has already won. China has already won. China has the geographical advantage economically, militarily. They have the advantage. They've already won. The only thing for America to do is to accept this defeat. In short, accept this defeat, accept this decline. And by accepting this decline, we have to, or we should, or we try to make the Chinese more Western. We try to make the Chinese more American, more modern, more democratic. This was Kissinger and Nixon opening up China in the 70s, which then was instantiated with the WTO later on in the late 90s and 2000s. This was them opening up China as the great new horizon and sending our manufacturing, sending the working class jobs, middle class to high value paying upper middle class jobs to China. This was us giving away our sovereignty, our manufacturing sovereignty, over to a country who we promoted that we were going to turn into Americans on their way up. Didn't happen that way. Number one, our Western elites that brokered the deal were the worst of Western society. They were highly educated. They were highly trained in Darwinist crown academia and philosophy. But they were the worst part of Western culture. And you took the worst part of Western culture and eventually you matched them up with the worst part of Chinese culture. And now you have a dragon that can't be slain. Now, we go back to Thucydides. Here's what I want to say about the Thucydides Trap. Number one, it's built on a farce, okay? It's built on a scam that they built. It's built on a scam that they created. And let me explain to you how diabolical these geopolitical matters are and just how sophisticated and intelligent and deceptive the people we're talking about are. China as a nation couldn't be China unless America drew the battle plans. Now, anytime you send a person from your nation to another, this is an old adage, an old tale, where a kingdom or a nation or one town or one province or one territory sends an emissary to another town, nation, place, or territory in order to create a relationship, a friendly relationship, a working relationship, a collaborative relationship. But when that person gets over there, they get bought off. This is what's happened with Henry Kissinger and you could argue Graham Allison, who was an author and a political thought leader in many respects himself. They're sucking President Xi's balls, and they're getting paid big money to do it. But these are our Western thought leaders. These have been the forefathers of Western foreign affairs since after World War II. Okay, certainly since the mid 70s. These were the people who put the entire thing in motion. And to this day, many politicians, many people from within the administrative state, and certainly the security state or the deep state, many people take what these thought leaders believe. They take what they believe as doctrinal, such as the Thucydides Trap, which Graham Allison has made a career in discussing and wrote a book about, and so on and so forth. And Henry Kissinger is 100 years old, but he's still considered the best go-to source for international affairs and foreign relations. He taught, understand, his thoughts informed and taught the entire political elite that now sit on either side of the aisle for the most part. Uniparty. Post-World War II democratic liberal order, rules-based order. Henry Kissinger is such a diabolical little fuck, okay? He actually went to China along with a bunch of other American globalists. They taught the Chinese how to become exactly what they've become today. Before we came to China in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, the Chinese had no clue how to become the manufacturing center of the world. We turned them into the manufacturing center of the world, okay? We turned them into the economic powerhouse that they are today. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the Chinese people and their hunger and their work ethic and them carrying it out or executing it. But what I'm saying is if you go back far enough in history, you see America's fingerprints all over One Belt, One Road. Another term you need to write down. One Belt, One Road. China 2030, China 2050. One Belt, One Road is an initiative that is by many measures based around another piece of history I want to introduce to you, and we'll leave Kissinger and those guys to the side for now. We're going to circle back to Kissinger and those guys in a moment. But this is the second piece of history I need you to understand. The Thucydides Trap, about rising and declining powers, or the conflict, the emerging conflict between two superpowers, and the smaller nations or the smaller interests that see a conflict on the horizon, and they stoke the flames of conflict for their own gain. The next piece of history was written by a man that forwarded the idea of the Eurasian landmass, the Eurasian world island, and the Heartland. Okay, and this was I want to make sure I say his full name right for you guys to be able to. The Geographical Pivot of History is the book that he wrote. Okay, let me make sure you get the name right for you, right? The Geographical Pivot of History was written by Halford John Mackinder. Okay, this is the Mackinder World Island theory. This is the Mackinder Eurasian landmass theory. But his name was Halford John Mackinder. This is another theory that you're going to have to dig into, because the people on MSNBC and all these other political pundit shows won't mention the theory anymore. This is the double cross and triple cross. This is the thought, the philosophy beneath the surface. This is, you got your WWE politics with the tip of the iceberg that they show you on CNN, but the Mackinder land theory is what's taught in all of the intellectual traditions of the European monarchy. Halford John Mackinder. And he wrote a book called The Geographical Pivot of History. And the Geographical Pivot of History says that Russia, or this area, what they call the Heartland, Russia, Ukraine, there's a crescent there, which China, Southeast Asia really isn't a part of. But the Chinese got in on it. They understand it. This Heartland area is considered the geographical key to controlling the entire Eurasian world island. And the Eurasian world island is actually the Afro-Eurasian world island, because those three continents connect. And because those three continents all connect, it means that you can get to places by walking. And when we say walking, we really mean by railroad system or by sophisticated land transportation, which is much easier than naval transportation. And to go a little deeper into that, if you can get all three continents under one rule, you will control over 50% of the world's natural resources. This was Mackinder's theory. Now, understand where Mackinder came from. Mackinder came from Great Britain. Okay, he was trained in the intellectual tradition of the European monarchies, and this theory, this book, The Geographical Pivot of History, was released in 1904. It wasn't a book, it was a paper. It was a paper that was written. This was back when they had intellectuals and academics and authors write papers. Now, anytime a paper pops up, you got to wonder who's behind it. With Mackinder, it's really not a wonder at all. It was the crown. And in fact, Mackinder has been on the record, if you go back and read through history, saying that his personal goal was to warn the crown of being a supremely naval power in a society or a civilization where land transportation and land military was advancing. So Mackinder was working for the crown. And another piece of history. So you got the Mackinder land theory, you got the Eurasian landmass, you got the geographical pivot of history. These are dominant military, geopolitical and military theories, whether they want to admit them or not, whether Morning Mika will talk about it or not. Don Lemon, he's sitting on a dildo throne. He won't talk about the Mackinder land theory if his life depended on it, okay? These are the real these are what the generals here in China, the generals there in China, the generals here in America, the generals there in Great Britain, the generals in Moscow and wherever else. This is what they talk. This is the game of risk. Okay, this is what we're into now. We are now in the game of risk. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the game of risk was loosely based on Mackinder's Eurasian landmass. The Eurasian land theory. Okay, now let's talk about Mackinder himself, because this is an important piece of history. The Great Game. This is another term you need to look into. The Great Game was an ongoing conflict or tension between Russia and Britain. Okay, and Russia and Britain in about 1907, 1908, after much conflict over disputed territories, Great Britain and Russia came to an agreement. Okay, I want to make sure that the Anglo-Russo alliance, or the Anglo-Russo treaty. I want to make sure that that's right for you all, so we don't give you the wrong information. Anglo-Russo. I'm sorry, 1 second here. The Anglo-Russo agreement. the Anglo-Russian Convention. Okay. The Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907. This was the convention between the United Kingdom and Russia relating to Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet. Okay, Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet were disputed territories between Great Britain and Russia for a long time, and they had played these war games with each other and so on and so forth. So this would be a time that I think even was considered one of the Thucydides Trap moments where the British and the Russians came together and they found peace for a moment. Obviously, the circumstance today would show that peace has not prevailed in that conflict. And if you look at things over a long enough time horizon, that's often the case. So this was about the disputed land of Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet. Okay, but anyway, the Russians and the British have been at war for a couple hundred years, at least, if not more. Okay, and you have to understand that the crown where this Mackinder land theory was originated from, the crown was very concerned about Russia dominating the Eurasian landmass. And they even were on the record many times saying, hey, we have to stop Russia's advancement into Europe. And so this war that you're seeing being played out now between Ukraine and Russia is an old war. It's an old war with even greater consequence, with even greater ramifications, greater implications. And I want to circle back for one moment to the Mackinder land theory. And the saying that came out of the popular saying that came out of the Mackinder land theory was summarized later by him in 1919. And he said, "Who rules East Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world." Now, many people dispute that. Many people came back in a counter theory or in opposition or detractors and said, yeah, but Mackinder was off because he didn't consider aerial power, which now aerial power and long-range missile strikes and things like that are a third consideration in a land power versus naval power civilization or global landscape, geopolitical landscape. But the reality still remains that natural resources are a big deal. We already know that. We know that, and we know that our elites think that because we can go listen to Andrew Bustamante, who's a former CIA spy, talk about the nature of the war between Russia and Ukraine in one of the most dishonest, honest ways possible, right? If you can read between the lines, in some ways he's saying exactly what it is, and in other ways he's trying to shield for the security state, which of course he would do because once you work for the CIA, you never stop working for the CIA, in my opinion. But this is interesting. I want you to consider this. The Heartland is that area, right? I mean, the Ukraine's right there, right? And when you think about it from a geographical standpoint, it's the area that connects Europe, and then right there with the Black Sea and it also connects Africa with Europe and with Asia and Russia and the whole deal. This is the center of the world. So that's the Heartland. And Mackinder's theory is who rules Eastern Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world. This was written in Mackinder's book, Democratic Ideals and Reality, page 150. He says, any power which controlled the world island and would control well over 50% of the world's resources. The Heartland's size and central position made it the key to controlling the world island. The vital question was how to secure control for the Heartland. This question may seem pointless since in 1904, the Russian Empire had ruled most of the area from Volga, the river Volga, to eastern Siberia for centuries. But throughout the 19th century, okay, I'm just reading here. And this is Wikipedia, by the way, but they have these references. I check these references out. They check out. Some of the stuff on Wikipedia is, if you get into the history on Wikipedia, it's decent. When you get into the stuff that's written by the mainstream media today, you got big problems, right? If we go to Donald Trump's Wikipedia, it'll say Donald Trump claims that the election wasn't safe, and this has been proven a conspiracy theory. When you go back to look up Mackinder and the Crown and this entire globalist agenda, for some reason they feel completely comfortable putting it right out in the open. This is hiding in plain sight. This is, you American citizens are jerk-offs. You won't even look, so we'll just put that right in front of you. The Western European powers had combined, usually successfully, in the Great Game to prevent Russian expansion. Okay? The Western European powers had combined, usually successfully, in the Great Game to prevent Russian expansion. The Russian Empire was huge, but socially, politically, and technologically backward, inferior in virility, equipment, and organization. Mackinder held that effective political domination of the Heartland by a single power had been unattainable in the past because these reasons. The Heartland was protected from sea power by ice to the north and mountains and deserts to the south. Previous land invasions from east to west and vice versa were unsuccessful because lack of efficient transportation made it impossible to assure continual stream of men and supplies. Okay, the technology of transportation previously, when Great Britain and Russia had these conflicts and Russia was unable to expand west, the transportation had stopped them from doing so. This is really interesting. Mackinder outlined the following ways in which the Heartland might become a springboard for global domination in the 20th century. SIMPA 2000, SIMPA the year 2000. This was his theory. Number one, successful invasion of Russia by a Western European nation, most probably Germany. Mackinder believed that the introduction of the railroad had removed the Heartland's invulnerability to land invasion. Now understand, the introduction of the railroad removed the obstacle that had formerly or previously made the Heartland invulnerable to land invasion. As Eurasia began to be covered by an extensive network of railroads, there was an excellent chance that a powerful continental nation could extend its political control over the Eastern European gateway to the Eurasian landmass. In Mackinder's words, who rules East Europe commands the Heartland. So that's another way it could happen. One, you could have a successful invasion of Russia by a Western European power. Okay. Number two, a Russo-German alliance. Now, this is interesting because traditionally the Germans and the Russians were at each other's throats. They hate each other. They still hate each other. And this is the conflict that you see in Russia and Ukraine now, because the Ukrainians, part of Ukraine, is occupied by what they call White Russians. Historically, they were called the White Russians. This is all factual. You can go check it out. They were called the White Russians, and the White Russians were more Germanic. And then you have the Russians who are Slavic. Those are historical ethnic groups. So you got the Germanics, and then you got the Slavs, okay? And that right there, that whole area, the Eastern Bloc, that's a fault line. These people have been at war for hundreds of years, okay, if not more. But here they forward, or Mackinder's theory was, a Russo-German alliance could potentially be a springboard for global domination. Why? Because in 1917, both countries were ruled by autocrats. The Tsar and the Kaiser were both autocrats and could have been attracted to an alliance against the democratic powers of Western Europe. This is pre-World War I. Now, what I'm trying to show you is that the intellectual tradition, the thought experiments, the theory, the geopolitical theory was already floating out there before the first cannons went off. Nobody knows how much these theories played into the promulgation of World War I or World War II. Nobody can say. But it's quite conspicuous that many of the players who have laid the foundation of our civilization's most devastating conflicts pop up in Mackinder's theories. A German power. Understand what he's saying here. The danger of this man was from Great Britain, okay? Commissioned by the crown. I'm sure if you go and look into all of his funding and who put him up to the whole theory, we're at the end of the Anglo 1907, I think it was 1904, 1905, early 1900s. We've come to the Anglo-Russo Convention, where the British and the Russians are going to put down the guns, divide up the territories, and call a truce. Shortly thereafter, we have World War I. About 10 to 15 years after, you start getting the rumblings of World War I. And this theory says it plainly. If the Russians and the Germans form an alliance, the Eurasian landmass is gone. If the Russians and the Germans come together, a Russo-German alliance with autocrats, the Tsar in Russia and the Kaiser, both could have been attracted to an alliance against the democratic powers of Western Europe. This is pre-World War II. So when I say the post-World War II democratic liberal order, what I'm showing you is the world order was a result of two cataclysmic wars. But before the first war ever started, before World War I started, there was already an analysis on paper that was considered prominent, that was considered important, that pitted Western democratic powers against both Russia and Germany. And where does the war play out? Germany goes first. Germany, who wanted Britain's approval. Let's remember, you can find many, many pictures of Hitler and George together. Hitler wanted, so the story says, Hitler, who favored Napoleon, who had a strong land-based army and a reasonable naval army, but not as good of a navy as the British, many would say. But they were on the move. I mean, Germany's naval power was definitely on the move, no doubt. They had a war machine that rivals any in history. But Hitler wanted George wanted Britain to come in with him against Russia. Okay? Now, they'll tell you in the story, or some will say that it was the Bolshevik Revolution, or it was the Bolsheviks, or it was the communism, or all these things that Adolf Hitler was fighting against. But really, the geographical significance of World War I is laid out, in World War II is laid out in Mackinder's theory. Hitler wanted Russia. Hitler wanted the Heartland. Hitler wanted the Eurasian landmass. And he knew if he could take Russia out, if need be, if he could take Russia out, he could run the whole gamut. And he wanted Britain to come in with him. Britain wouldn't bite. Okay, Great Britain. But now, let's forward a different theory. Maybe Great Britain put Hitler up to it. Now, that'll seem super controversial, right? Everybody who's protecting the world order, everybody who's protecting the narrative about World War II will scoff at the idea that Great Britain could have put Hitler up to it in the first place. But see, this is what happens with globalists. This is what happens with people who play the game of risk, who move pieces around the board. They forget, like the great Steve Bannon would say, when you cross over the line into the fog of war and enter the law of unintended consequences. And we've seen that in our own recent history with America and our role on the geopolitical stage, in certain nations that we think we can influence and then control, and then all of a sudden some leader gets too big for his britches and decides that he no longer needs to take orders. That would be Saddam and Muammar Gaddafi, right? Who's to say that Hitler wasn't put up to it by certain Western powers? That's certainly who Zelensky is today. Now, am I saying that Zelensky has perpetrated the same type of evil and genocide that Adolf Hitler did? No. What I'm saying is behind the scenes, behind closed doors. Zelensky is the same person who Hitler was, or could be the same person that Hitler was then. It's certainly laid out here. We cannot let the autocrats of both Russia and Germany form an alliance. If they do, the world island is gone. It says it right here. The U.S. was isolationist regarding European affairs until it became a participant of World War I in 1917. Germany would have contributed to such an alliance, its formidable army, and its large and growing sea power. This was a third possible one, and I think this is so interesting. Now, there are gaps in Mackinder's theory, but from a geographical standpoint, I mean, some of this stuff is just oracle reading, right? And he was put up, don't get me wrong, the British are smart. They're a smart group, and we're going to get to how smart they are in a moment. So I'm not taking anything from them. I think that they're Satanists. And not all British people, don't get me wrong, but I think the British elites and the globalists and this sort of European monarchy, these people were Satanists, okay? But there are a lot of Satanists, so they're not alone in that either. This isn't really a unique criticism. I'm just going off of history. This one's really interesting. The third and final way that Mackinder said the Eurasian landmass or the Heartland could end up being the springboard to world domination was conquest of Russia by a Sino-Japanese empire. Boom. Conquest of Russia by a Sino-Japanese empire. The combined empire's large East Asian coastline would also provide the potential for it to become a major sea power. Mackinder's Who Rules Eastern Europe Commands the Heartland does not cover this scenario, probably because the previous two scenarios with the Russian-German alliance and a Western European continental power like Germany, those were the two scenarios that were seen as major risks of the 19th century and the early 1900s. Let me say it again for you. They didn't consider the Sino-Japanese empire conquering Russia as a prominent pathway, because the German war machine or Germany as a nation or a Western nation and then the Germany-Russian alliance were seen as the real threats of the early 1900s. This was before the war. This was all pre-World War I. And then it just says here that one of Mackinder's personal objectives was to warn Britain that its traditional reliance on sea power would become a weakness as improved land transport opened up the heartland for invasion and industrialization. Okay. So we've gone through the Thucydides Trap. We've gone through the Mackinder geographical pivot of history and the Eurasian landmass, the heartland, and the world island. So where are we sitting today? In a jump ball. I said it episode 1, maybe episode 2. You can go back and read. We're in a geopolitical jump ball. The double cross and the triple cross, the quadruple cross. Who do we trust? We have two dominant powers on the board, America and China. This is Thucydides Trap, right? Two dominant powers. One seemingly rising, the other, us, declining. The immovable object. We're considered the immovable object, right? China is the unstoppable force, but America is the immovable object. Which one will cede? Which one will give way in the end? And here's where things get tricky. It's my theory that the Thucydides Trap and the Mackinder landmass theory, the Mackinder Eurasian landmass world island theory, are both scams. Not that they don't have some validity, not that they can't be justified or calculated or quantified or laid out on a map, not that they can't be shown throughout history, but in their representation or presentation today, and certainly in their presentation post-World War II. And this is what happens when your society becomes over-intellectualized and overly academic. You have a bunch of theorists, a bunch of political and cultural and societal theorists that get in a room, and everybody else trusts them because they sound smart. Everybody else trusts them because they've read a lot. Everybody else trusts them because they present well, or whatever the case may be. This is kind of another form of moral hazard that has plagued our civilization. People who are now, these are people who are too smart for their own good. When the NBA told me I was too smart for my own good, they were just saying, "Shut up. We don't want to Negro, shut up. Make sure you write the time down, because if we don't bleep out the word Negro, they're gonna take us off off of YouTube for sure." But what they really were saying in the NBA was, "Negro, shut up. You don't even get a play. You don't have any opinion here. You bounce the ball, you take your check, and you go and live the life of a superstar that we provide for you. Outside of that, we don't really need to hear you." These are the same people, by the way, who are forwarding these agendas. They all know. They're all in on it. They understand these geopolitics. They've been initiated. Their universities teach this as a 101, right? This is political science 101. The Mackinder land theory, the Mackinder world island, and Thucydides Trap and the Peloponnesian War, all these things are 101 for the people who come out of West Point, for the people who come out of Chicago Business School, for the people who come out of Harvard and Yale. This is all 101. These people are initiated in this stuff. It's my theory that the whole thing is a scam. It's all based on a lie. And here's the lie. The lie was perpetuated by Henry Kissinger and the rest of the globalists after World War II. The lie says that we are on a collision course with China because we are defending the rules-based order. It's all based on the rules-based order. And let's go back to China for a second and Thucydides Trap. The collision course with China is based on the fact that the fact, now it's not an argument, it's a fact, that the post-World War II democratic liberal order created a type of peace and didn't really create genuine peace. It created a peace between superpowers, right? World War II saw a collision of superpowers. Since then, we haven't had that collision. The Security Council from the United Nations, or of the United Nations, has, for the most part, ensured that superpowers didn't go to direct conflict, but they spilled their shit all over the rest of the world, and they've created great resentment from the rest of the world for that very reason. Legitimate criticism and resentment of foreign affairs, like Muammar Gaddafi pointed out in his UN speech. Contradiction to the United Nations preamble and charter. Okay, the Security Council is the anti-security council. Really, they're going to war in proxy with other smaller nations, and they're creating that third party who sees the rising conflict or the tension between powerful nations, and they think, let's stoke the flames. So you got the thing working in both directions, right? You got the Saudis, you got the Iranians, you got the Russians, you got the European monarchy, the globalists. Everybody's sitting there. See, you got China, unique, most populated country. Okay. It's unique. Energy, people, production, work, slavery, business model. And you got America, two oceans, protected, innovation, science, technology, a unique constitution, a blend of culture. You got these powers that have unique history. And they've positioned them uniquely today, which is more important. You got these two powers. They're on the brink of war. Well, this is what Kissinger used to justify the thing the entire time. This is what Kissinger used to justify his mission the entire time. What do we think he was telling the Chinese when he went there in the first place? Because now the China position is, we weren't in power yet. We weren't who we are today when the rules-based order was created. And when Obama, let me take you back to this history, in 2014, so it might have been 2012, maybe 2011. But in 2011, no, it might have been 2014. 2008 to 2016, Obama was in. It's about 2014. This was right when the shit kicked off with Crimea, actually. There are no coincidences, but there are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. Barack Obama talked about the pivot to Asia. Now, this is a high-level spooky security state shill right here. The pivot to Asia. What does that sound like? The great pivot, the geographical pivot of history, right? Right? Barack Obama initiated, understands Mackinder's land there. All of these things are fundamental for your average DC elite that was trained in a European intellectual tradition. In fact, many of our young politicians who grow up with political ambitions get sent to UK, Great Britain, to learn these things. And then they come back. The pivot to Asia was supposed to be us getting out of the Middle East and thinking more about the future of China and its economy and how we needed to become partners and collaborators with them, okay? The pivot to Asia. And then Hillary Clinton said, we're pivoting to Asia. And then we had a Chinese government official or a Chinese political voice, pundit and person on their end say, you should just pivot on out of here, right? And that was sort of a contentious headline statement at the time back in 2014. Why didn't America just pivot on out of Asia? This brings us to the question that we have to answer today, and this is why I brought you through that history. Because here we sit on the brink of war with China, the CCP. The question really is, can we avert war? And if we go to war, and this is the question that I forward, if war shall come, which in all likelihood it might, in some form or another, maybe it's a skirmish, maybe it's extended, we don't know. But if war should come, what should be the basis of which we fight that war? And I want to go back to Kissinger to help you understand this. Their theory of the case is that the CCP was not the CCP of today, and they believe that the rules-based order that exists is biased against them, okay? It doesn't consider them, doesn't consider their power, doesn't consider their contribution. This is when I pointed out the four-player jump ball. You got the free people of America, which represent free people all around the world. You have the European monarchy, the globalists, the party of Davos. You have Russia, and you have China. The party of Davos represents an international dictatorship, obviously, because Europe is an international conglomerate, the European Union, and the Western Commonwealth. This is an international alliance. And then you have national, that's an international dictatorship. And then you have national dictatorships. Russia, China represent a national dictatorship. And right now, President Xi finds himself in the unique position of having been the apple of the eye of the European monarchy, but still being deeply, deeply Chinese. And when I say that, the Chinese have a cultural tradition called the mandate from heaven, and the Chinese people are their religion. They are the ultimate expression of ethno-nationalism, which none of our Western leaders or Democrats talk about when they talk about racism or culturalism or ethnicity or marginalized groups or intersections or any of their race-bait identity politics. They never admit or acknowledge that China, and specifically the CCP, is the ultimate expression of ethno-nationalism. Never talk about that. It's not by accident. Why? Because their forefathers, like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, went to China a long time ago, when Mao was there. Now remember, Mao is the inception of communist China. Right? They went to him and they knew what they were asking for. We believe in this Mackinder landmass theory. We believe in the Eurasian landmass, the world island theory. We've been taught in the intellectual tradition. We believe in it. You're the rising power. Remember Kissinger, he's one of the progenitors of this rising power, declining power paradigm. You're the rising power. All we can do is show you how to assume control, and hopefully, in the end, you'll repay us by giving us an aristocratic throne full of dildos. Okay, that's what the ask was. That's what they've perpetrated. That's what the European Union thinks they're going to get. That's what the party of Davos thinks they're going to get. We taught China how to be what China is today. Now the question becomes, how much did the rules-based order factor in to the current prosperity of China? A great deal. That part is true. That part is certainly true, can't be denied. But even more importantly, that rules-based order was initiated by the European monarchy as well. The European monarchy initiated the rules-based order of democracy, post-World War II democratic liberal order. And then they had a group within that rules-based order globalist movement go to China and say, you're the future. And they've been working on it for 40 years. And you're just now finding out about it. When the Chinese say we're going to a new security bloc with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, you're just now finding out about it. And what's taking place is there are some people in the West, who still believe in the West, who still believe in the Westphalian nation state, certainly in America, who still believe in having a country, who don't want to give this up. They got us in a trick bag because really, in order to win, we can't defend every place out there that was formerly under the rubric of the rules-based order. If you go listen to Graham Allison talk about Thucydides Trap and the conflict between America and China during his Google talk, what he laid out plainly is, hey, yeah, the threat of North Korea, which is another third-party player that sees a conflict and could be poking or stoking the flame or poking the bear. But I actually think it's the reverse. I actually think China's putting North Korea up to it. That's my opinion. They're using them as the crazy front guy to create tension, posturing, right? And they could be trying to provoke us into a conflict. That could be possible as well. All these things need to be considered now. But what Graham Allison says is, yeah, when Donald Trump says he could take care of North Korea if President Xi doesn't want to, right? Now we're talking Trump. Now you're starting to see when the dollar gets transferred, the world economic hegemony starts to shift to a more China-centric hegemony. Now they're coming to prosecute Donald Trump. Understand what's taking place here. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at you're looking at geopolitical matters. You're looking at geopolitical moves. You're looking at the game of risk at the highest level, and a person like Donald Trump throws a monkey wrench in the whole deal because one thing that he is well-versed on, that he is committed to tracking and making sure America is in the right position is our relationship with China, is our geopolitical position with China and our position defending the European monarchies. This war, this alienation of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, this goes all the way back to Donald Trump saying, we're going to pull out of NATO. We're not going to continue to pay 4% of a GDP that's 10 to 20 times bigger than all of you people's GDP, and you're putting 2% in. That's what I mean by we still live under the rule of the crown. We protect the crown. We adopted Britain's foreign policy after the Atlantic Charter was signed. After Winston Churchill renounced the colonial empire, we became the protectorate of Great Britain and the rest of the European monarchies. And they became fat. They're fat cats. They think that they can use America's guns, America's steel, America's children, America's young men and women. They think they can use us to keep their posh aristocratic position in Europe. And it's nothing they didn't try with Germany. I'm showing you the history. I'm showing you the sequence of events. All you got to do is go back and read it for yourself. You may have to do a little digging, but for the most part, it's right there. Donald Trump says we will pull out of NATO unless every European country contributes at least the same percentage of their GDP that we do. We're not going to be protecting Europe against Russian advancement or the Russo-Sino advancement, the Russo-Chinese advance. We're not going to be the protectorate over here. For what? You people are in control of your own destiny. If you all want to sell out to the Chinese, that's fine. Be our guest, but we're not going to protect you over here. If you are, you're going to pay. You're going to pay. The crown, you're going to pay. France, you're going to pay. Germany, you're going to pay. Switzerland, you're going to pay. We're not going to be over here sacrificing people and men and killing an alliance, a potential alliance with Russia, which is a big deal on the Eurasian landmass. We're not going to sacrifice that to protect you in some ancient culture war, some ancient geographical battle between you and Russia. We're not doing it. That's what sparked the indictment against Donald Trump. That's what sparked the disdain for Donald Trump. That's what sparked the attack and the continued attack, the sustained effort to discredit and take down Donald Trump. I don't care about what he says in some locker room. I don't care about what he says on the phone. I don't much care what he says at all because I understand the bigger scope of things. Now, am I saying that Donald Trump's perfect? No, but what I'm showing you is there are matters that are being discussed, that are being planned, that are being executed and carried out that have nothing to do with what most people talk about from the nightly broadcast on CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News for that matter. This is intentional. This is the security state and the intellectual elites of a Western society helping you feel comfortable at night through a CIA and security state psyop that only talks in headlines, that only talks in sound bites, that increasingly only talks in a shorter number of characters, that only shows you content in a shorter duration and time span. This is your intellectual elites finding a way to help you jerk off and feel comfortable at night. But the whole thing's coming to an end right now. And Alex Jones, who they threw out there as a conspiracy theorist, he's been calling this for 10 years, 15 years. He said this is the way it was going to go down. It's all coming down right now. But he's the crazy one. He's the conspiracy theorist. Well, please call me crazy because now that I'm digging into it, it doesn't take me long to figure it out. And this wasn't my forte. This isn't my line of country. I didn't go to school for political science. I didn't go to school for history. I've always been interested in history, but that's not my formal training. Really, since about 2017, when I was living in Canada and saw what happened to Jordan Peterson and started to look at, I actually heard Jordan Peterson use the word English, talk about the English Commonwealth and English Commonwealth law. That's when I started to initiate myself in the history of the Commonwealth and the Crown. And here we are today. American tax money, American soldiers are being sent to the front line in the Ukraine, in a territory that was, by its own historical account, owned by the Russian Empire many, many years. Now we're being sent to draw a line in the sand against the Russians to protect Europe. And it doesn't stop there. Let me continue. Because the other thing Graham Allison said, and you can go look it up, Graham Allison, Thucydides Trap, Google Talk, about 58 minutes. The other thing Graham Allison said is when Donald Trump went to President Xi and told President Xi, you can handle Kim Jong-un, you can handle him, or I'll do it. One way or another. That was a fire starter. That kicked up the aim towards Donald Trump. He knows all this. He understood this. He knew what it was going to do before he did it. He knew the crosshairs it would put him in. See, all of these things have become the status quo. This has become the status quo, steady hand modus operandi from your DC elites on both sides of the aisle. And they shake hands and they come out before the media and they want to have some cultural wedge issue like, let's say, stop and frisk. And they want you to be focused and ruminate around stop and frisk. And I'm not saying stop and frisk is inconsequential. But do you ever stop to wonder why that makes and dominates the headlines and you've never actually heard of John Halford Mackinder? You've never actually heard about the Thucydides Trap? You've never studied the Peloponnesian War? Do you ever wonder why your Rachel Maddows and Don Lemons don't come on and talk about the Peloponnesian War when it comes to foreign affairs? This is the intellectual tradition that they've been trained in. They were trained in the tradition, and then they were taught how to keep you in a jerk off. Donald Trump went to President Xi and he said, you can deal with Kim Jong-un or I can. Because a missile strike, a long-range missile strike could completely set the North Koreans back in terms of their nuclear capacity or their plans to become more efficient in nuclear weapons. 100%. Even Graham Allison says, yeah, that could happen easily. We could easily do that. But then he says, if we do, 1 million people will die in Seoul, in South Korea. And South Korea is a part of the rules-based order. This is a country that is an example of what we want the world to be. He said that out of his own mouth. I don't think you understand the implications of that. This is globalism. This is you taking your tax money and your sons and daughters and protecting South Korea. For what? Not for freedom. Not for democracy even. Not for God. Not for Christianity. Not for inalienable rights given to you and granted to you by a creator. Not that. For the post-World War II democratic liberal order. For globalism. This is what you've been involuntarily, I won't say involuntarily because we did it voluntarily. We signed the terms and conditions. But unbeknownst to you, you've signed on. This is why Bannon says the American people guarantee the whole thing. It's all on your back. You got some intellectual omnisex. You got some intellectual international, metropolitan, omnisexuals like Kissinger and Graham, who literally says in the presentation, I'm on my way to China next week. I'm on my way to China in 2 weeks. I'll be there in China. It's a marvel what they've done. Oh, it takes us 5-6 years to rebuild a bridge, and the Chinese do it in 48 hours. Yeah, because we've been halted. Much of our progress from infrastructure, much of our national interest is always stagnated by the controlled opposition arguments between the uniparty. That's why it's hard to get a bill signed, an omnibus bill signed to build a bridge, because they want to bake a bunch of cultural wedges into the omnibus bill. And both sides say no on the face of their voter base, who have no clue about what's going on in China. And they all know it, and they're all in on it together. Imagine your DC elites giving a little phone call and a little kite, a little note. They're to Beijing, they're to Geneva to say, you know what? We got the American people right where we want them. We got the American people right where we want them. They're fighting about stop and frisk. We can't get a bill passed in the Congress or the Senate because stop and frisk. There's some stop and frisk thing on page 1006. There's some, pick one, pick an issue. It doesn't matter. Pick an issue. On page 2004, we don't like the title on page 1. We don't like to acknowledge the founding fathers on page 6. So we can't get this bill done in time. We can't get the funding to look at you. Look, Pete Buttigieg, the head of the Department of Transportation. Are you kidding me? $32 trillion in debt. Your cities should look like Shangri-La. Your cities are shit compared to the Chinese in Beijing. That's a fact. But here's what they don't say. Here's what they fail to mention. Here's what Graham Allison fails to mention. We paid for the Chinese. What you see there in Beijing, you paid for it. All of you paid for it. One Belt, One Road will have a long trail of Western receipts, and more specifically, American receipts. And they taught them how to do it. Wasn't by accident. They believe in Thucydides Trap. The only way that we can avoid an all-out war with the CCP is if we have imaginative statesmanship, right? We have to be imaginative in our collaboration. You know what imaginative means? Are you at least are you at least awake enough? I hate to use the word awake because it's conflated with woke, but are you paying attention enough to know what they mean when they say we need imaginative statesmanship to avert a catastrophic conflict with China? What they mean is every single place that the petro-yuan touches will become a tributary territory, a tributary state, a tributary people to the throne there in China. And all your aristocrats are going to play the same role that they've always played. Hey, it doesn't change for us much. We don't much care who's in power. And now we're going to get to the deeper part of it. Now we're going to get to the quiet part out loud, the part that nobody really wants to touch, because they would like to keep the matters in this sort of geopolitical context, right? And there's great geopolitical context and there's great geographical context, but there's better spiritual context, okay? Now we're going to get to the heart, the bone of the matter. The Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party. They're Marxists. The Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx, who was an anti-Jew who was trained in the intellectual European tradition. Okay, and at the time, Marxism was seen as an anti-crown tradition. And maybe it was at a point. But beneath the surface of the social circumstance, the distribution of wealth or welfare in Europe, in Germany at the time where Karl Marx came from, aside from that, communism is a form of radical materialism. I've said it before on the show, but it's fitting for me to say it again here in this context so you can understand. The Chinese are the ultimate expression. They're the ultimate expression of Marxism. You guys don't see it. Now, some people would say, oh, no, they're more capitalist than they are communist. No, they're not. The CCP are radical materialists. Radical. Do you think it's by accident that the CCP has gone out of their way to hunt down, to persecute and silence and imprison anybody who has faith? In the West, we have this sort of culture where we live in a melting pot. So we got Jews and Christians and all these different denominations of Christians and Muslims and so on and so forth, and agnostics and non-denominationals and blah, 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 blah. In China, they're not wasting any time with that. If you believe in any higher power, you're coming with us. We got a place for you. We got a number for you. We got a jumper for you. We got a jumpsuit for you. We got a re-education camp for you. It's barbed wire. You're going to love it. By the time you get done, you'll be indoctrinated with the CCP view of things, and then you can live under our thumb. It's anti-God. Government is the highest authority. It's right out in the open. It's anti-American. It's anti the United States Constitution. It's anti-Christian. It's anti-Muslim. It's anti-Jewish. Hell, it's anti-Buddhist. They don't believe in Buddha. The CCP is anti-Buddhist. Do you know what they're doing to the Tibetan, the monks, who want to live a spiritual but meditative life? Ask the Dalai Lama about what the CCP has done to the monks. They persecuted the Dalai Lama. A lot of you was sitting online. I saw you 10 years ago when MySpace and Instagram was just kicking up. Oh, you couldn't wait to quote the Dalai Lama. You milquetoast, lukewarm, uninitiated politics with your French fries jerk-offs. You couldn't wait to quote the Dalai Lama. And now the CCP is going after the Dalai Lama and suppressing the Tibetan monks, and you can't wait to buy your goods from China. You can't wait to be a metropolitan, omnisexual, globalist, world-traveling trader. You can't wait. I'm watching you. I'm watching, even you Christians. Well, Christian this, Christian that. Oh, let's talk about Scripture. Let's argue about the details of Scripture. When it says, upon this rock I will build my church, and thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Let's argue about the context of it. Did he really mean Peter? Is there really any justification to call Peter a saint? Blah, 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 blah. right? This whole Protestant Catholic little spat, corny, petty, like two pretty girls at high school who are, always competing. You know what I'm saying, Tanner, right? There's those two pretty girls at high school who are pretty, should just be grateful that they're pretty, right? Should just be grateful that they, visibly they look better than most other people, but they can't, right? Their ego and their narcissism just bubbles up and they can't help but hate each other. And then they can't help but try and slander each other behind closed doors, right? Reputation tarnishment. That's Catholics and Protestants. And I'm a Catholic. And I favor the Catholic position on these issues. But I understand the criticisms of the Catholic Church. But don't think it's lost on me that you're still willing to buy anti-God, anti-good, anti-God, anti-Christian, Catholic or Lutheran or Protestant or whatever else, that you're willing to buy CCP goods. You're willing to live a modern technocratic life that is afforded to you by Satanists. You actually create the atheist position. The atheists over there on the far left are saying, oh, these Christians are hypocrites. You fortify that position when you act that way, when you behave that way, when you bicker about doctrine and about scripture, but then you turn around and reap the material benefits of an anti-God society, right? You're Christian, but you take your antibiotics from a Satanist CCP manufacturer. Let's get serious here. Let's talk about what's really going on here. Karl Marx was anti-God. He was secular, and he came from a secular European intellectual tradition. And if we go all the way back there, do you think it's by accident that it was a European who came from Germany, Kissinger, same guy, same guy as Karl Marx, to boot, modified, 2.0, 3.0, same guy. Came from the same country, in fact, Germany, okay? Henry Kissinger walks into China, lays the battle plan for him, basically, comes home and tells us, Thucydides Trap, Thucydides Trap. Oh, we got to be careful for the Thucydides Trap. And we're going to play into it? We don't need to be on a collision course with China. If North Korea wants to develop missiles that can hit San Francisco, we should drop a hammer on North Korea. The people in Seoul got to fight for themselves. Why this entire time, if we built Seoul and South Korea up as this democratic liberal order, why can't they defend themselves? This is what the welfare state wants from you. This is what totalitarianism wants from you. And our elites here in D.C. that traded us, that sold us out to the CCP, they did it because they have totalitarian ambitions that match President Xi's. They like President Xi. They like it this way. They like a Seoul who's under the rubric of post-World War II democratic liberal order, but can't defend themselves without us, the government. The United States government, the United States military. You black people out there, we love you. We want to protect you. We want to give you freedom. We want to protect you from white supremacy. But without us, you're not safe. You see how the global affects the local? You see how the global maps on to the local? You 501c3 Christian institutions, you can't worship unless we protect you. Unless we give you a tax-exempt status. You're scared of the taxes. You're scared of the taxes more than the persecution. Some of you grifting, sellout Christians. You can't wait to get your new your new technology monitoring system for your congregation on Sundays from the CCP. You could care less. And then you'll say, oh, but the Muslims, why do we care about the Uyghurs? The Muslims aren't our brothers. They're not our brothers in faith. Cowards. Cowards. I know you're tight. So you want me to believe that you'll turn your head the other way when the persecution comes down on the Muslims, but a wise man knows I could be a Christian on the same street with you, and you'll turn your head if it's convenient for you then too. And that's why I use the example of Peter. And I don't say that in a denigrating way to everybody out there. I'm just talking about the reality, because Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And that was his boy. That was his right-hand man. And Jesus already knew it. He understood. He had that profound divine wisdom. So he already knew it would happen. He told him it would happen. Before the night is up, you'll deny me 3 times. Profound. A lot to be said for life. A lot to be said for the eternal when you think about that type of wisdom and foresight. A lot to be said for that. But all I'm saying is when you're out here talking and we're out here and we're having this debate about these geopolitical issues, just don't think you can fool me. Insult somebody else's intelligence. Don't do it here. Don't do it in the comments. Don't send me a message. Just save your fucking breath. Because I see right through that bullshit. Y'all are all willing to sit there and let the Uyghurs rot in some re-education camp because it's far away from your convenience. You could care less. And if they were Christians over there in China getting persecuted, you'd care less the same, which is why the house Christians who actually live in China, who are getting persecuted the same way the Uyghurs are, but there's less of them, you don't got nothing to say about that either. Then you'll hear the black people go, oh, well, China's too far. Why are we worried about China? We got black people that have problems here. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. You disconnected, hyperbolic, in a vacuum, fake woke, meme living, Instagram living, omnisexual, metropolitan, globalist sellouts. Marxists, radical materialists. That's who you are. That's who you've become. Marx, CCP, the CCP is the ultimate expression of Karl Marx and anti-God radical materialism. That's the reality. And now we need to protect Seoul. We need to protect Japan. We need to protect Taiwan. We need to protect Israel. We need to protect India. We need to protect Europe. It's all based on a lie. And here's the deepest lie. I'm just unlayering it piece by piece by piece. If you don't have enough pride and seriousness in your own life, in your own citizenship, in your own intellectual growth, then don't go back and don't go and watch it back. Just say, hey, Royce is just rambling. This is tinfoil hat shit. Okay. If that helps you sleep better at night. But you can just go look it up yourself. When you avoid the 3-click process that it takes to find this stuff, to say that I'm a conspiracy theorist, I know you're a jerk off and your destiny is your own, right? You don't want the truth. Here's the deepest part of it. The entire post-World War II democratic liberal order is not based on an affinity for democracy and truth and justice and fairness and freedom. That's a lie. And that's a lie they're going to tell you now, right? As they prosecute Donald Trump, that's the lie they're going to tell you. Sorry, my suit gets a little hot here. I hope you guys like my Easter color here. This is mohair, by the way. 3 Angora goats had to die for me to have this suit. I hope that's not materialism. That's not materialism. A great mohair suit a man should have, okay? And the animals were put here for us to consume, but clothes, eat, the list goes on. 3 Angora goats had to die for me to have this suit. I hope you like the color. I hope you all get some aesthetic pleasure out of it this evening. But it gets hot. But it is Easter week. Listen, here's the deepest part of it. The post-World War II democratic liberal order was not constructed to bring democracy, to bring freedom, to bring fairness and justice, to bring equality. That's all a lie. That was not the intention. The intention was to create a peace and prosperity between superpowers while technology grew enough to become the government of the world. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at the impulse towards technological advancement supplanting any remnant of nation, any remnant of nation state, which is a supplant of, in many ways, of any remnant of culture and identity. They're going to give you a new identity. This is what the Marxists go. This is why the neo-Marxists the postmodern Marxists play on identity politics, it was all a scam. The scam was, if we can take your identity from you, your national identity, your ethnic identity, your historical identity, if we can take your identity from you, it becomes easy to give you a new one. And that's why you got people now who are white who say that they're trans race. And you got people who are black men cutting off their penis to become a woman. You got black parents who are allowing their young kids to take hormone blockers to transform them into another sex. Is that tinfoil hat? We have an identity crisis, but the identity crisis plays into their geopolitical agenda. If you're not a citizen of a nation, if you're not a member of a community, if you're not a person of a land and a place and a time, then you're nobody. And when you're nobody, it's easy to make you the somebody I need you to be. And the somebody they need you to be is the highest level of drone and slave that a technological civilization could possibly produce. You don't see it? You're stuck in front of your fucking phone 8 hours out of the day. Go look at the time you spend on your phone. Hide in plain sight. The iPhone will even tell you how many hours you spend on the phone. They'll even give it to you. That's actually, you know, that's just pissing on your head and telling you it's rain, right? We're going to tell you how many hours you spend on this device because you can't help it. You're a slave to you're a slave to your primal impulses. You're a slave to your limbic system. You're a slave to serotonin. You're a slave to dopamine. You can't help it. You can't help it. A crack addict can't help but play the slots. We know that. You're a slot. You lost your soul at the slots. You don't even know it. Living your life by memes, living your life by horoscopes. This is the reality. This has become the reality. This has become the reality all around the world. But America first and foremost. I mean, let's keep it at the national. We need to protect Seoul in Japan. We need to protect Seoul in Japan and Taiwan and Israel and the whole European Union. And who else? Throw somebody else in there just for shits and giggles. We don't need to protect these people. That's the international rules-based order. The whole lie of the Thucydides Trap is that the war to come with China is based on us providing a rules-based order for all these countries that we protected all this time. No. The real fight to come between us and China, if it must, will and should be because they are antithetical to freedom. Now, that may be hard for some people to grasp because I just kind of laid out a spirit or ethos why the whole thing is a lie and we're not on a collision course with China. That's not what I'm saying to you. We are in the Thucydides trap. The question is, what's the premise of the trap? Is the premise a European monarchy, metropolitan world order, or is it American freedom? And what's interesting is all these places that we went to protect, with the exception of Israel for the most part, but all these other places we went to protect, especially there in the Pacific, Japan, Seoul, Taiwan. Let's look and see if they have a Second Amendment. Let's see in our stewardship or in our guidance of democratic liberal order in these countries if we prioritize the Second Amendment. So that if a neighboring China ever did invade Taiwan or South Korea or Japan, that those people would be there, would have the means to protect themselves against an invading foreign authority like we have here in America. Which is why Graham Allison feels fine saying, you know what, if we do decide to take care of North Korea, it's not going to be us that feel the effect. Primarily, it'll be the people in Seoul. It'll be the people that we propped up, that we took under our wing, but made sure they would always be dependent on us. That's predatory. This is what they piloted with black people in slavery. I'm showing you the link from the global to the local. And a lot of y'all don't want to talk about race. You don't want to talk about American history. Slavery against black people was a pilot for slavery against you. It's coming down right now. All around the world. We're going to have to stay and fight or pull out. Pull back. Come back home. And we should come back home. We should come back home because we got some rat killing to do right here in our own country. And I'm not saying we should take these people out and hang them or any other violence against them. I'm not about that. Truth Commission. Let's find out how deep the rabbit hole goes. I always admired Nelson Mandela and the way they went about that post-apartheid when they had the Truth Commission. Bring everybody forward. Tell us what role you played in it so that we can protect ourselves from this in the future. That's hindsight of a nation. But hey, now the South Africans are going on the yuan too. Now the South Africans are trading in yuan, right? The BRICS. Now Brazil's trading in the yuan. The BRIC. It was laid out. They showed them how to do it. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Here we go. The game is on, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, there's a war coming. Number one, we're at war in our own nation, the enemy within. You think it's by accident? The trajectory the United States dollar has taken in the last 100 years? You think it's by accident what the Federal Reserve has done to the American dollar, the point we're at now? Do you think it's by accident that G. Edward Griffin says that inflation, that this type of inflation is a prerequisite for war? Is a predicate for war? I'm sorry, not a prerequisite, a predicate? That it's a predicate for war? And here we are. The dollar's going to collapse. And our argument as Americans should rightfully be, hey, if China wants to become the leader of the world, have at it. You take on all of these people. You take on all of these welfare nations that the IMF and the World Bank have been subsidizing for years in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. You take on these nations. Go ahead. That's what we should be trying to do. That would actually be a humble play. I actually agree with the Chinese man who said, you know what, Hillary, how about you pivot your way on out of Asia? We should do that. Let the Chinese handle it. And you know what? On our way out, we should preach the gospel and we should emphasize and prioritize the idea of freedom and understand the real foundational ideas that built this country against tyranny, because the CCP will be tyrannical. Understand that. And many of these nations will have to decide to rise up against that tyrannical rule on their own. That's for them to decide. Now, as soon as the CCP starts to threaten this nation, we better have our ducks in a row. Because I'll tell you one thing, the Chinese, they don't forget and they don't forgive. They have a 5,700-year-old culture and tradition. They don't forget, they don't forgive. We better get our house in order right now. So when you go to vote in 2024, as you watch the malicious prosecution of Donald Trump, understand what's at stake. Not your small talk over your dinner, over your TV dinner. That's not what's at stake here. What's at stake is if you can actually continue to be a citizen of a country, and if that country is going to have any remnant of freedom. Everybody loves to criticize America, and I'm not one who doesn't. I'm on the list as well. But there is a freedom that we enjoy in this country that is like nothing else that has ever been seen in history. There is a freedom we enjoy in this nation that has never been seen before in history. That's what's at risk. That's what's on the line. Don't allow your Henry Kissingers and all these other metropolitan omnisexuals to pretend like they want to protect some national interest on behalf of democratic liberal order. They want to protect New World Order and their place in it. And at the end of the day, If they need to sell you out in order to protect an aristocratic, elevated position in that world order that is now China-centric, they'll do it. And you're watching it happen right now on the Eurasian landmass. Thucydides Trap, Mackinder's The Geographical Pivot of History, The Great Game Between Russia and Great Britain. These are the historical items that you need to go and familiarize yourself with. I'm sorry I didn't get to any housekeeping. We'll be back with you Wednesday night. I have to run. I appreciate your viewership today and in the future. As always, the fight continues. Godspeed.